The desert wind carried a thin veil of dust into the base, curling it into the open flaps of the command tent. Inside, the air felt heavy, tense, as though something unseen had already decided the outcome of the confrontation before it began. She stood at the center of it all, her presence an uninvited intrusion to those who claimed authority here. A tall woman with tired eyes and a scarf draped loosely over her shoulders. Her boots bore the faded, scuffed marks of miles walked in harsher places than this. The uniform she wore was civilian. Worn jeans, a muted jacket. Yet there was a weight to her stance that drew glances from every man in the tent. The colonel's voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp and public. He didn't shout, but each word was flung with the precision of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. She was told she had no clearance, that civilians were not permitted beyond the outer perimeter, that she was to leave immediately. His tone carried the cold detachment of regulation, yet beneath it was the faint curl of contempt, as if her presence alone was an offense. Soldiers shifted on their seats and leaned against their rifles, their eyes flicking from the colonel to the woman, waiting for the moment she would falter, speak or submit. But she said nothing. Silence was her weapon. The stillness around her deepened, as though the desert itself had chosen to listen. Beneath the colonel's clipped words, the rumble of armored engines echoed faintly from outside, and somewhere, the sharp scent of oil and sand mingled in the heat. She didn't move to explain herself. Her gaze remained steady on the man before her, the lines at the corners of her eyes unmoving, her lips pressed into a calm that unsettled even those who thought themselves hardened by war. Her story was invisible to them, yet etched into every fiber of her being. Years ago, she had worn a uniform too, though not the one here. The weight of Kevlar on her shoulders, the constant vigilance of days without proper sleep, the cold taste of adrenaline before breaching a door. All these memories lived in the set of her jaw and the straightness of her spine. She had served in places the colonel's boots had never touched, where the rules were written by necessity and survival. She had been part of missions that would never make it into speeches or commendations, where the price of failure wasn't paperwork, it was lives. She carried the memory of a dusty village where the smell of smoke never left the air, where the shadows of those she couldn't save haunted her long after she'd left. She remembered the steady weight of her spotter's hand on her shoulder before each operation, the murmured words meant to steady her heart. And she remembered the day that same hand went limp, its warmth leaving faster than her mind could comprehend. That was the day she stopped asking permission to walk into danger. That was the day her silence became a promise. The colonel's voice was louder now. Though still controlled, the demand sharpened by impatience. Around them, the soldiers' posture shifted, some leaning forward in quiet curiosity, others stiffening as though bracing for a confrontation. The desert heat pressed in on the tent, trapping the scent of sweat and dust. She did not move toward the exit as ordered. Instead, with the same unhurried precision of someone sighting a target, she lifted her hand between them, turning her fist until the silver ring on her finger caught the harsh light filtering through the canvas. It was a simple band, but in its center glimmered a small crimson emblem, sharply cut, unyielding. The moment the colonel's gaze fell on it, something inside him shifted, the words stalled on his tongue. His eyes widened, the steel of command momentarily cracking to reveal something else. Recognition, and perhaps fear. The emblem was not common, nor something carried for decoration. It marked those who had once belonged to a unit so quiet the world barely knew they existed. A unit whose members were bound by missions whispered in war rooms, whose presence often meant the end of a battle before it began. They called them Reapers. No one in the tent spoke. The silence was absolute, and in it, the balance of power turned without a single word exchanged. The colonel's gaze flicked toward the soldiers around them, as if suddenly aware that every eye was watching. His lips tightened, his posture shifting just enough to betray uncertainty. She didn't need to explain herself. The ring was explanation enough. It spoke of operations far beyond his command, of authority earned in places where rank was irrelevant, where skill and resolve were the only currency. It carried the weight of fallen comrades and the lives saved in the shadows. It reminded him that some people did not need permission to stand where they chose to stand. He stepped back, not much, but enough that the men around them noticed. In that subtle retreat, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that whatever orders he thought to give, they no longer applied here. Her silence was no longer defiance. It was the stillness of someone who had already proven themselves where it mattered. A younger soldier near the back straightened slightly, his eyes flicking from the ring to her face. Another adjusted his grip on his rifle, his gaze softening with something like respect. The air shifted, invisible yet undeniable, until the tent felt less like a place of confrontation and more like a quiet court where judgment had already been rendered. When she finally lowered her hand, the moment did not break, it deepened. The colonel gave a short nod, a gesture that was neither permission nor dismissal, but acknowledgement. Without a word, she turned and stepped past him, out into the blinding sunlight, where the armored vehicles stood guard. The soldiers didn't move to stop her. Behind her, whispers would soon pass through the camp, carried like embers from one corner to the next. They would speak of the woman who had walked into the colonel's tent and left without bending to his authority. They would remember the ring, the emblem that made even the man who commanded them pause. And somewhere beyond the horizon, in places most would never see, there were others like her, quiet, unseen, carrying their battles in silence. Not for recognition, not for medals, but because they had made a promise long ago that they intended to keep. If you saw her that day, you might have thought she was just a woman in a scarf, walking away from a tent in the desert, but the truth was simpler and heavier. She was someone who had already earned the right to stand wherever she chose, and no one in that camp would forget it. Her silence had spoken louder than any order, and it would echo long after she was gone.